for later in the evening and also for tomorrow. We also want to thank the government of Canada for co-sponsoring the side event, for giving the support, and of course to all the governments who are here, who are great colleagues of us when we are working on LGBTI issues. Today we have an incredible panel with a lot of people. So the dynamic will be the following. First of all, we will be having interpretation into Spanish for those of you who would like to listen to Spanish or English. Some of our panelists will be speaking in Spanish. So without more extension, I would like to welcome our first panelist, who is Lucerena Aranda Arroyo. She is the director of Las Reinas Chulas, a Mexican cabaret organization where stage artists dedicate a large part of their work to activism, including to advance the human rights of bisexual persons. Luz is also co-secretary general of the ILGA Latin American and Caribbean Regional Office, a branch of ILGA working to advance SOGIESC issues in Latin America and the Caribbean. So, Luz, the first question will be, from a human rights perspective, which is the situation, challenges, and opportunities that bisexual people face in the Latin America and Caribbean region?
Gracias, Diana. Buenos días a todos y a todas.
Good morning, Diana, and thank you for being here with us this morning. First, I would like to start by defining bisexuality so that we understand each other better. Bisexuality is a type of sexual orientation for those who feel emotional, romantic attraction towards persons of more than one gender or sex. Not necessarily at the same time, in the same way, or with the same intensity. We're going to base ourselves on this definition, if you all agree. So what's important here is not at the same time, not in the same manner, and not with the same intensity, because bisexual persons, it doesn't really mean that we are all in love, or we fall in love with anyone at the same time. And this is a prejudice that we must fight. And I think this definition aims at breaking that prejudice. I would like to focus on the Latin American Caribbean region. The information has been shared. As you probably know, the situation is of the bisexual persons in Latin America is not well known. There are hardly any statistics. There are hardly any reports that actually document our daily experiences, our specific needs. It is extremely important to determine the number of bisexual persons, because first there's lack of research on the matter, but also because there are different definitions of what bisexuality is. Bisexuality can be seen as something very narrow, like the number of people that identify themselves as bisexuals and bisexual. And but if we define this in a broader sense, that is, people that have had attraction for more than one gender or sex, then of course the numbers increase significantly. And it's a wide segment of the population falls into this category. The fact that there are hardly any data or reports or research about all these has led to a lack of action and public policies that guarantee our rights. Bisexuality, and this is one of the most important problems that we face, has been seen as an invisible or voiceless type of sexuality in the media, and even amongst lesbians and gays. We are many times were not included in the psychological aspects or in reports about lesbians and gays, and this is seen across the world. It is important not to forget certain aspects when we talk about bisexual people. The experience that bisexual people have are different from heterosexual gays or lesbians. Biphobia manifests itself rather in a different manner as homophobia or lesbophobia. Bisexual people suffer discrimination and prejudice both amongst heterosexual persons and also amongst lesbian and gay communities. So we're discriminated against from both sides. And here I would like to read, if you all agree, part of the report made by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights about bisexual persons. In paragraph 105 it says, the Inter-American Commission has noted that violence against bisexual people is the hardest to document. Over the period of 15 months, that is between January 2013 and March 2014, the Commission received reports on violence against acts against bisexual men that were perceived as such. It is difficult to document violence directed specifically against bisexual persons for the fact of being bisexual, because unless the source indicates specifically that somebody is being attacked for being bisexual, violence against bisexual people is directed against them because they're perceived as gay or lesbians, or because they're being seen giving love to people of the same sex. This, of course, this tendency to categorize specifically violence against sadistically rather, violence against a bisexual person without really seeing the real motivation makes this group invisible for statistical reasons. The same paragraph the same report in paragraph 270 it says, the Commission has received reports on violence against bisexual women that seem to be worse than that suffered by lesbian women. In 2010, the U.S. reported types of violence against bisexual persons over their lives. The bisexual women suffer more violence, more acts of violence than lesbian women. And just to finish, in 2015, in November, we met in the city of Guatemala in a pre-conference on bisexual issues in Ilga Lac. And so we met in Guatemala, as I was saying. At that conference, we spoke about different issues and problems in the region, amongst which we talked about how we have to face the fear of not being that is typical of not being able to express our bisexual sexual orientation. As I said, heterosexuals and LGBT people have been hostile towards us when we claim that we are on, or we reveal our orientation. And I would leave this report here about Latin America and the Caribbean.
as she first of all started from the concept of what is or who is a bisexual person, as well as has shared some of the challenges that bisexual people face in the Latin American and Caribbean region. Also highlighted that there is not available information when it comes to numbers of bisexual people, but also highlighted some of the challenges that they face, and more importantly, the differences between the violence and discrimination that a heterosexual person or a lesbian or gay person might face. Now I would like to give the floor to Ian Andreas Lawrence. He's the director and Vice President of the American Institute of Bisexuality, where he enhances public knowledge, awareness, and understanding about bisexual persons. The American Institute of Bisexuality funds research and organizes and sponsors conferences, public forums, panels, social and cultural activities that increase visibility of bisexuality. Welcome, Ian.
Do I need to press this?
Yes.
Is this working? Okay, this is my first time doing this here. Okay. Well, to expand on what Lou said, another challenge for outreach towards the bisexual community is that it's often difficult just to go by people's self-identity, which seems to be what the approach most often is, at least with some public health kind of approaches. The sex researchers that we often work with from the American Institute of Bisexuality, they like to divide it up into what we call the AIB model, which just happens to be our acronym too, but it's attraction, identity, behavior, and looking at all those three elements to try to reach the full spectrum of people who, in one way or another, could be seen as bi. As Luz also said, there's a shortage of data, although in the last, well, definitely since 2000, but even in the last 10 years, there's been a big increase in data, at least in North American context. It seems to be that about 1.8% of the US population identifies as bisexual, compared to 1.7% of the US population that identifies as, as lesbian or gay. That came from a GATE study out of the Williams Institute at UCLA that looked at 5 huge data sets. But to kind of go back to that issue of identity, attraction, and behavior, if you expand what you consider to be bisexual to look at what some people call mostly heterosexuals, you can get percentages as high as 5% of men and 10% of women being in that bisexual spectrum. Now, the bi rights movement in North America began in the 70s, and just to illustrate the stigma and position that the community has started from, a 1999 study of public attitudes across the United States found that bi people were rated less favorably than all other groups, whether religious, ethnic, gay and lesbian also, even political groups, except for one exception. Only IV drug users rated low, more low in public opinion. But ironically, studies also show that the straight majority of the US population believes that bisexual people are more readily accepted. So there's a big paradox in reality and in perception. And another thing that needs to be remembered if you're doing any kind of outreach towards the bi community is that there's also considerable hostility from the gay and lesbian community that has consistently documented health ramifications. And a 2014 study showed that even today, 15% of the US population does not believe bisexuality even exists. Now, in general, people who support SOGI rights tend to hold the position that the causes for non-heterosexuality and gender nonconformity are somehow inborn or essentialist. And the inverse is also true. People who are usually against SOGI rights tend to think that it's somehow caused by family dynamics or early childhood experiences and stuff like that. And this puts bi people in an interesting situation because for the bi community, there's an idea of choice out there that doesn't really save you in the sense that it that the inborn approach or the inborn nature that most supporters see doesn't, I'm sorry, I kind of lost myself in that sentence. But the idea of choice is one that adds stigma to the bi community. Another issue that is prevalent in North America is that the cultural norm is for monogamy, and even if bi people are not monogamous, they are somehow assumed to violate that norm, either because they're insisting upon having their bisexuality be relevant when it shouldn't be, because you really should just be in a single relationship anyways, and your sexuality should be defined by who you're with, or because it creates an even bigger problem of bi invisibility, that people's orientation is assumed to be that which is reflected by their current partner. And so whether it's public outreach to the LGBT community or anything like that, the bi community is repeatedly and consistently forgotten. And as part of this, only 12% of bi men are out to the important people in their lives, or 33% of bi women are out, and in contrast, 77% of gay men and 71% of lesbians. So there's an environment of a lot of stigma and invisibility. From a SOGI human rights point of view, it's important to remember that covering or addressing the issues of the gay and lesbian community is not enough to take care of the bi community. A famous study by Bostwick and Herkenborg pointed out 7 specific issues that the bi community deals with that gays and lesbians do not. That includes bi-specific hostility, denial or dismissal of bisexuality as legitimate, or as the province of deeply confused or lying people. The idea of unintelligibility, that it simply is too complicated to understand. Pressure to change to a monosexual identity, that means straight, gay, or lesbian. And the idea that bisexuality is somehow a transitional stage. The idea that bisexual people are not really queer or queer enough to be part of the LGBT community. Dating exclusion, where people refuse to date them. And the idea of hypersexuality, that bi people are somehow incapable of monogamy or other forms of meaningful relationships. I think I'm slowly running out of time here, so I better jump ahead. In general, there are very few resources devoted to the bi community. In 2008, there were $107 million in grants given to LGBT issues or SOGI issues, and out of that, literally 0 was bi-specific. And that has not really improved since then. The LGBT rights situation in Canada is actually quite good on a global perspective. There's full marriage equality since 2005, and provinces such as Quebec are actually quite trailblazing in terms of SOGI rights. In the US, there was marriage equality as of 2015, but in the last year or so, there's been a slow push against LGBT rights or SOGI rights, largely based on religious grounds, which brings me to my next point, is that a lot of times the rejection of,
Take your time.
Thank you. There's a lot to say and not enough time. So data consistently shows that bi people have higher rates of depression and suicidality and drug use and the like. That can likely be traced to both familial and community rejection. And going back to the whole religious idea, is that often familial rejection comes out of religious beliefs, and families think that they're helping by rejecting their SOGI or otherwise LGBT children. They think that they're keeping them away from an immoral lifestyle or something like that and helping by either throwing them out or just treating them poorly. But there's a great project out of San Francisco called the Family Acceptance Project, and they have found that this form of rejection actually increases the very kinds of problems that conservative families hope to be avoiding. It increases depression, increases chance of homelessness, STIs, drug use, everything basically I think any conservative religious parent would not want. And conversely, acceptance of their children decreases the rates of all those things. And Caitlin Ryan and her team at Family Acceptance Project has done a great job reaching out specifically to the Mormon community and conservative immigrant communities by helping them understand that by accepting their children, they can increase their health and well-being. Let's see. I had one more thing before I'm running out of time here. Oh, and the other forum that's important to also remember is that social support. Now, that obviously I understand from a government standpoint that's hard to litigate, but social support has also been shown to be a very important factor in mitigating depression and other health disparities. Now, as far as research is concerned, like I said, there's been an increase, but there's still a dire shortage of research that's longitudinal, that looks at people to see how interventions, especially positive interventions and positive experiences, affect them over the lifespan and how we can intervene and increase by health statistics. And I think that's it for me for now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ian, for sharing with us the experience of the North American region. I think it's quite a shift between what Luz just said and you have said. You have more data and more experiences. I think we need to start collecting more data on these issues. Also, for sharing the challenges that bisexual people have within the movement and the challenges also that bisexual organizations and bisexual people face when it comes to funding. Also the sad reality that bisexual people face depression, suicidal thoughts, and also drug abuse. But I think there is a very important, clear message for states who are seated today that can be improved, to say it in a way, when there is social support from your side. So now I would like to give the floor to Sude Rad. They is a queer feminist, bisexual human rights defender. After years of activism in the French and Iranian queer and feminist movements, Sude is now the president of a French-based queer feminist NGO called Spectrum Foundation. So, Sude.
Thank you. I would just add that I'm also a board member of ILGA Europe, but today I am representing bisexual people of Asia. And I'm going to be very fast, I hope, because Asia is the biggest continent, as you all know. And very diverse. In fact, we have different cultures, different politic systems, different religions, and we also have Iraq, Syria, they're like under war, so the situation of human rights is already very obvious, but yet today we're going to talk about the bisexual condition. Several countries which same-sex sexual conduct is punishable by death are located actually in Asia. There is Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Iran, United Arab Emirates, and also parts of Malaysia. In fact, we do not have a very systematic sexual education, which is not biased in Asia. Children are grown up seeing a mom and a dad and children as a family, and any other kind of sexual conduct is considered to be abnormal. Of course, parents then push their children to be normal. Quotation mark, of course. We recently heard about what ISIS did to presumed homosexual men, but in fact there were men engaged in some sort of sexual act with same-sex people, and we never knew if they were bisexual or even identified themselves as homosexual, but media did cover them as homosexual people being thrown off the buildings. This is the caricature, the very painful caricature of what is happening to bisexuals of Asia. If there is any research, there is not really a research so far, so we can talk about the population of bisexuals in Asian countries or in a specific Asian country. Homosexuals are covering, as an umbrella term, the bisexuals. So biphobia is even not shown in the researchers, if you're saying, and we are seeing this by invisibility also among the movements. So the movements are not even speaking out for bisexual people, and they're considering bisexuality as sort of homosexuality, occasional homosexuality. When it comes to mental and physical health, as we've seen with Luz and Yan in other parts of the world, it's not going to be any different in Asian countries, but it's going to be even worse because we do not have sufficient mental support for people, let's say. But then when it comes to LGBTI plus community, it's less, and then bisexuals are among the most vulnerable communities. I'm not going to repeat the things as I already said, so I'm going to give you this image of biphobia and bi-erasure, but the situation of many Asian countries pushes LGBTI people to flee from their countries. We have lots and lots of asylum seekers now living in Turkey, for instance. I'm talking about the Iraqi, Iranian, Afghan, and other LGBTI refugees and asylum seekers living now in Turkey, and with the situation of decision of the American state and also Canadian state, they are actually stuck in Turkey because they have no right to work, they have no health care, they have no access to any kind of care and support, but also they're waiting for some sort of freedom from this limbo they're living in. There is also the fact that LGBTI asylum seekers do suffer, let's say, from biphobia themselves. So bisexual people are seen as fake gay cases, and it kind of has created a sort of competition to get that very little available places of freedom, let's say. So there is a lot of attack among the community of asylum seekers, and we are trying to figure out how we can help them. Of course, raising awareness is a point we're working on, but it is not enough. I know that many people from states are here, so I would love to ask you specifically, when it comes to UPRs, when it comes to recommendations, please do consider bisexual community as a community and biphobia. Please do not use homosexuals or homophobia as an umbrella term, because this is different. And this is not because we are bisexuals that we're telling you we are different. As a matter of fact, biphobia has another sort of, let's say, recognition, let's say, we need to recognize it. Please do consider bisexuals and bisexuality in the recommendations. It definitely helps us to raise our voices and say, even at the Human Rights Council, people are using bisexuality and they're not covering homosexuals, like we're not covered by homosexuality, we are there. Please also advocate for our human rights. And please do avoid cultural relativism, because this is not helping us, especially the bisexual people, because many states, but also many people, in many societies, they see bisexual people as people who have a choice between being normal, so heterosexual, or abnormal, homosexual. So if we have a choice, if people see us as people who are making the wrong choices, then it comes, the culture is going to be the most harmful thing. Also, I would like everyone here, I would like to invite you to help us help those asylum seekers and people who are actually fleeing from their home with no support from their family, so that we can make at least those periods of waiting for resettlement better period, let's say, of their lives, so that they do not commit suicide, etc., etc. Also, if it comes to funds, please consider funds for bisexual researchers, because we are not covered. If there is any research, the numbers are not showing the bisexual population, their problems, and how they're feeling among the community. I don't know how much time I have left. I've tried to be really fast, and I've been very fast. I have 4 minutes left. I would also love to bring up the fact of intersectionality. Intersectionality in bi activism and human rights of bisexual people is a very, very important key to help us to become at least less unequal compared to the other community members. We are not competing with homosexual rights or transgender rights, but please consider that transgenders and trans people can also be bisexuals, and they are gonna suffer from double, let's say triple, or even more sorts of discrimination. So helping bisexuality and bisexual rights is not only about one orientation, it is about the human rights of queer people, if we use queer as an umbrella term. I would leave it here and then give more time for questions if there's any.
Thank you very much, Sude. Everyone is speaking so fast. All of you have a lot of time. So thank you very much for sharing the experiences of Asian countries. As you highlighted, there are very different countries in just one continent, to say it in a way. And I think you have a different reality than the Latin American, at least, and the Caribbean will be the exception, and North America, taking into account that in some of your countries there still exists criminalization, so that it's even a higher challenge when it comes to lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and intersex people. Also, many thanks for sharing some of the human rights violations that occur to bisexual people when it comes, for example, to access to work, health care, and a very important topic, which is asylum seekers. Now the world is facing very difficult situations. People have to go away from their homes either because of a conflict or because of their sexual orientation, gender identity expression. So yes, indeed, the issue of having to prove that you're gay, and plus having to prove that you're actually a bisexual person, and to make people understand who is a bisexual person, and that bisexual people also exist, because these cases also happen is because of the lack of knowledge that people don't understand that bisexual people do exist and what is the concept. So thank you for that. I think you made a very good recommendation. We at ILGA have also pushed more governments since the third cycle to have more specific recommendations rather than talking always about LGBTI or LGBT issues. And I think we are getting to that point. Now we are seeing specific recommendations on trans issues. We are seeing specific recommendations on intersex issues. And this is a clear call to have specific recommendations on bisexual persons and the different challenges that these arise. So we hope, and I say here, to have more bisexual human rights defenders making advocacy to have those recommendations too. Also, you said, or you pointed something quite interesting, which was cultural relativism versus human rights. I remember that early last week, Victor Madrigal, the so gay independent expert, made a quite interesting post about culture and human rights issues, saying that culture is not the excuse for violating human rights. And I think that you're right. They can walk together, and it's okay, and should be okay, and it's how it should be. And finally, your last message, which was intersectionality. I think it's very important to understand the different levels of discrimination that a bisexual person can face. So now I would like to give the floor to Radika Ura, right? Hura. Radika is a Serbian bisexual activist and blogger working to increase the visibility of bisexual identity. She is the founder of a Facebook page, The Bisexuals of Serbia, and she will be talking today about the specific European situation.
Hello, everyone. I'm here to represent the bisexual population in Europe and to try to be their voice in this event. sexuality is a part of someone's identity, and without a name pronounced in public and without numbers, that part of someone's identity remains hidden. Sexuality is not just a sexual act. It is the way we function in many aspects of our social life. Bisexual people are discriminated in Europe, at work, at home, in interpersonal relations, and they are victims of partner violence, invisible for the statistics. Although Europe is very diverse environment, some countries have good culture of nourishing human rights, others don't, but bisexual people still exist, come out to their loved ones or not come out or remain hidden, but they are there. I'm coming from the Western Balkans region, and there in a recent year, there is people who come out as bisexual persons, but their coming out is mostly interpreted by communities or by the part of the society that nourishes human rights as internalized homophobia, and that denies their desire. However, there was specific events even in that part of Europe. The most collected data was we have in Netherlands and in the UK. For example, in the UK, the most vulnerable as a part of bisexual population are women and their mental health. 60% of bisexual women are more likely to report problems in diet or eating problems, the 37 in compared to 37% of lesbian women. Mostly it's because of distress connected to their sexual orientation and pressure on their mental health. Women remain the most vulnerable part of the bisexual population due to, especially in the environment that is not so friendly to human rights, to women's rights. And hypersexualization result in sexual harassment and violence. The only European country who actually included for the first time the term bisexual in a school program was Netherlands. And that was the move that actually for the first time it was mentioned, bisexual, in the school programs and offered in 2012 to school. Still, even in Netherlands, 50%, according to the national research, 50% of bisexual people didn't feel accepted by the society. No matter the high level of nourishing human rights and having marriage equality and the rights of minority, the most respected in Europe. Bisexual persons suffer discrimination at work, and that we have in the UK report that did by Stonewall. Bisexual people in workplace found that in the UK they highlighted the high level of ignorance on bisexuality and biphobia, and study faced with the contrast of question that bisexual persons faced constant questions on their sexuality, reported no bisexual network in their organizations and in the management, employment, and the most precarious nature of their work was the more people remained hidden when it comes to their sexual orientation. As a matter of fact, we have constantly merging in those two. We have data only collected in Netherlands and UK, and something in France on generally on bisexuality. 85% in France people consider bisexuality as the other sexual orientation, but when it comes to prejudice, they are still there, and they remain, they pushed bisexual people in the closets and remain invisible in each sphere of the society and their life. As statistics are emerging, we can't ignore the fact that bisexual persons in Europe exist. Data, written material, and documents that include bisexuality in a national and international context are non-existent, almost non-existent in Europe, while organizations and stakeholders try to deal or not to deal with bisexuality, negative statistics are increasing and emerging all over Europe. Lack of social and community support are keeping bisexual people in their closet. High quality specified actions and projects and research will help to combat stigma and all forms of discrimination against bisexual persons all over Europe, no matter how the climate in human rights is. The challenges bisexual persons face are almost the same everywhere. So although there is no, many countries and many governments tend to observe LGBT as unified and one group with no special attention to the groups, it is important to say that communities are diverse and they have problems in the law. As in Europe, another problem emerged in the law, no matter the working law, is asylum seekers' problems. In Great Britain, no safe refuge. No Safe Refuge report did by Stonewall as well portrait that bisexual persons are faced with questions, and when they had sexual or partnership history with the persons of different sex and gender, they are instantly put in doubt and questioned, and in the end, in most of cases, rejected. So that would be one unified action is needed all over Europe, and materials would be distributed in the communities are much needed to be visible and represented. So we need representation after all, and that representation has a name for us. It's bisexuality.
Thank you very much, Radhika, for exposing the violence and discrimination that bisexual people face in Europe. And also thank you for sharing some positive examples when it comes to France and the Netherlands with regards to legislation. You had more studies, at least from two specific countries, which is perhaps one of the differences between what Sude and Lucelena mentioned about Asia and the Latin American and Caribbean region. And I also think that you pointed out something very interesting, which is it's enough of a challenge for a bisexual bisexual person to come out, but once they come out, their sexuality is constantly being questioned and denied. So I think that is a very important message that you have left us. Ahora me gustaría darle la palabra a Frank Evelio.
Now I would like to give the floor to Frank Evelio. He is the president of Mano Iberia. This is an organization that works in Latin America, and actually he's talked a lot, he's studied a lot about discrimination facing the bisexual people. He focuses on the fact that on the need to take into account the specific realities and needs of the bisexual persons. He is going to talk about He's going to talk about the bisexual people then. Thank you for being here. For us, bisexual persons, this is a historic moment because it is the first time that we have come here to an international forum to submit some of the issues that we are facing. What I wanted to say is very similar to what has been said already. As has been said, there are very few research works about our concrete situation. In the US, as far as I know, there's a report that says that depression, mental problems, and isolation facing the bisexuals are amongst the highest within the LGBT community. There are specific psychological and mental problems facing bisexual people. So we need actions from the point of view of the psychomedical perspective. We need some actions that will help us out of this situation. It is true that we need actions that are more coherent and specific. World actions must also taken. Very often the problems that we face is because of the lack of knowledge by the governments and by administrations in general about our needs and about what the type of discrimination we are up against. There's a need for specific activities and actions that will allow us to overcome the situation. For us, this event will help us call upon you to help us to ensure that we can exercise our rights, our human rights, as bisexuals across the world. And we would like to call on you to also transmit this message, send this message to all your constituencies and your and fellow governments as well. We know that there's certain statistics in some of our states, the states in our region, but most of the violent situations are not well documented. It is important that to take political action, to have data and to have research. Bisexual people have this big challenge of not having enough data to base our actions on. It is important then to ask you for help. States very often do not break down the data into different situations and different realities. We would require many more reports, many more research works that take into account our realities. Some data in the US, which is one of the few countries that has data, it says that 40% of bisexual people have contemplating committing suicide as compared to other members of the LGBT community. More than half of the women, bisexual women rather, have been subject to rape. 45% of bisexual youth has been expelled or suffered bullying at school. It is important that we base ourselves on evidence, on hard data. And so we actually need much more research. Many of you perhaps have never heard about bisexuals or have heard about the definition that Luz gave us of bisexuals and bisexuality. So we're very much invisible to the world, but we're here today. We're here to help you understand our concrete reality. We're here to ask you to help us disseminate this message. We would like to call on you to help us as state members, as state delegates, to help us not only do research, but also develop plans specifically for bisexuals, perhaps not creating something additional to what there is, but rather include our perspective, whether here at the Council, at the Human Rights Council, or at home in your own countries. It is important to say also that because of our invisibility, it is difficult to obtain data about us. Very often homosexuals are considered bisexuals, or rather bisexuals are considered as homosexuals, or simply are categorized within this larger group of LGBT, lesbian or gays. There have been cases of violence against bisexual men, and very often to be able to document adequately this type of violence cases, it is important to determine whether the persons involved were bisexuals or not. So it is important to take our definitions into account. Bisexuals experience a lot of physical and psychological violence. That has also been reported in the US and elsewhere. Bisexuals are often thought as people that are not clear about their sexual orientation. They don't know whether they're gay or they're straight. So there is a stigma that we suffer from, and it leads bisexual people to reject what they are. And we suffer also from inequality vis-a-vis the law. We here at the Human Rights Council to say that we exist, that we are a concrete and specific group, that our rights are human rights, and that there's no reason why we couldn't enjoy our human rights just as everyone else. It is difficult for us to have this opportunities such as these to express our needs and to call upon people to help us. It is important to point out that this situation that we've described for the bisexuals is seen across the world. It is a global phenomenon, but there's no global instrument that allows us to overcome our difficulties, mainly because it is widely unknown. As many of our colleagues have said, there are some reports here and there, but there's no global report about what we represent in the world and the type of violence and the type of human rights violations that we suffer from. It would be important for us to have the opportunity, perhaps have some funding, to do some research, to try to do this in a systematic way, maybe with very specific research methods that will give us a more solid basis for to explain the human rights situation. rights, and it would also be important to know exactly what is happening all over across the world, in Africa, Latin America, and perhaps in a more detailed way. And also, of course, with regards to asylum seekers, very often bisexual people just lie about their sexual orientation in order to be able to be accepted or not suffer from discrimination as refugee, and to be able to obtain asylum. So they actually deny their own needs. Course, and we suffer not only from that, but also from lack of access to education, medical services, and also violence from our own partners. I think this is a great opportunity for us to try and ensure that our human rights are respected and exercised. We've noted some of the challenges that we need. There are positive developments in certain countries that are doing a lot for to include our specific needs in other curriculum, schools, curriculums, etc., curricula. So it is important that we know a lot more about this. Thank you very much, Frank, for what you've said.
I think a very important message that Frank has just shared with us is that this is the first opportunity that we have to build a bridge with the governments. And I'm very happy to see that despite that most of you are working on the last 2 days of the council, you're here. Because this is the starting point to have a conversation and to actually make changes and have an impact. Also, Frank said something that I really like, which was, you know us. You now know that we are human beings. And I don't know if some of you have had the chance to read our ILGA RIWI Global Attitude Survey, but it says that when a person knows someone in a sexual or a gender minority, this has a positive effect on attitudes towards them. So I think we are not only talking about pure violence and discrimination, but also we are talking to you who are policymakers and are the primary. So we hope that this has some type of impact when you talk to your own capitals or when you're working here at the council, that you are actually having in mind that, yes, it's an LGBTI community, but each one of these groups, to say it in a way, has particularities and differences and has challenges. Also, I think Frank showed us with very important examples from the US the importance of actually compiling data. With data, you can actually have the impact on a public policy because you know that is missing. So yes, and again, the issue of the asylum seekers, which I think that has been sort of like transversal for at least what is Europe and Asia, I believe. So now, before I'm going to make Mercedes, necesitas, sí, okay. Now we're going to make the pause, so I will invite each one of you to turn to your left side and tell to the person who is next to you what you have learned in this past hour, and then we will come back in 10 minutes, okay? Thank you.